Fire crossed the sky of Thessaly from one horizon to the other in the time it took a shepherd to drop his crook. It was not a star. Stars fall quietly. This came down the long blue afternoon screaming, white at the head, black at the tail, dragging a sound behind it that arrived late and all at once, like the sky clearing its throat. It struck the shoulder of Mount Othrys, and the mountain did something mountains are not built to do. It flinched. There was no echo. Echo requires air that survived. What rolled off the impact was pressure, a flat hand of displaced atmosphere that laid a forest of old pines down in one direction, all at once, the way wind lays down wheat. Then dust, then quiet. In the crater, half a mile of rock fused to black glass, ticking as it cooled. Something got up. It got up badly. That was the first detail worth recording. The figure climbed out of the smoking bowl the way dying soldiers climb. In installments, one arm, a knee, the other arm. It stood in the settling ash while the ash went on settling over it, gray on gray, until it looked less like a man than a statue of one, pulled from a burned temple, burnt copper skin under the soot, white hair gone the color of old smoke, 2 arms, and only 2, hanging off a frame built by 10,000 years of war, every muscle a record, every scar an argument. The eyes were the only part of him still burning, and they burned low. Coals at the end of a long night. He took a step and the glass cracked under his heel, and he registered it the way exhausted men register anything, late and without interest. The constellations rising in the east were strung in patterns no army of his had ever marched under. The air was thin, thin on mantra, thin on everything. Wrong sky, wrong world. He walked anyway, downhill. Down was the only direction his body had left. The patrol found him on the Pilgrim Road 2 hours later, in the blue hour, when the light goes the color of drowned things. 12 of them, in bronze that was not bronze. It held the dying light a half-second too long, the way metal does when a god's hand was in the forge. Tall, beautiful in the smooth, uninvolved way of statuary, garrison-grade divinities, the kind Olympus minted by the cohort to walk its tribute roads. And behind them, the road's cargo, 40 mortals, chained at the throat, the wrist, ankle to ankle, moving with the shuffling, agreed-upon gait of people who have learned what happens to the one who stumbles. Fresh brands on their shoulders, still weeping. At the head of the line, a man carried a gilded sun-disk standard, the sigil of whichever god would be receiving them. Near the rear walked a girl, 8 years old, 9 at most, chained by the neck alone, because her wrists were too small to hold the manacles. The captain looked at the soot-gray ruin limping up the verge and made the assessment his kind had been making for 1,000 years. Another broken thing the war left on the road. He set it sideways to his second, already finished with it. Move it or step over it. The figure stopped, not at the words, at the cargo, at the chains, at the girl who was looking back at him with the flat, conserving stare of a child who has stopped spending tears because tears cost water. Inside the ruin of him, something that had been lying very still for a very long time opened one eye. The air over his shoulders began faintly to shimmer. Heat with no fire. The captain noticed the stillness, because stillness, in garrison work, is a category of threat. "You were told to move." The stranger's hands closed. The knuckles cracked like green wood splitting. "Where?" And the voice came out from somewhere lower than a chest, a register the soldiers felt in their molars before their ears confirmed it. "Are you taking them?" "To the god who owns them." The captain brought his spear around, bored, ceremonial, a motion performed 10,000 times, and set the point against the stranger's sternum to file the lesson in flesh. "The same place you'll go, wreck, if—" He never finished. The universe takes a dim view of sentences like that. What happened next was described, later, by the one soldier who lived long enough to describe anything, as the sun coming up in the wrong place. The stranger's wrath did not build. It arrived. One instant, a derelict with a spear at his chest. The next, a detonation wearing the shape of a man. Heat climbed off his skin in a column that set the air itself alight. Dusk turned to noon for a quarter mile, and out of his back and ribs, with a sound of stone shearing somewhere under the world, 4 new arms unfolded. 6 in all, gold light cracking down every one of them like seams in a forged door. The spear at his sternum did not melt. Melting takes time. It simply stopped participating. Then he moved, and 12 soldiers stopped being a patrol and became an anatomy lesson. The captain went first, which was fair. A fist, one of 6, took him in the chest and declined to stop there. Through the breastplate, through the sternum behind it, through the bright divine machinery behind that, the heart, the golden coil of immortal lungs, and out between his shoulder blades, carrying most of the chest contents with it as one exiting piece. What dropped to the road was the front of a soldier and the back of a soldier, with nothing in between but evening light. His ichor came out gold and atomized, a fine glittering mist that hung in the heat shimmer like pollen. The second raised a shield. 2 hands closed on its rim and folded it shut, folded him since he was strapped to it, closing soldier and shield together like a book slammed by something that hated the book. His spine inverted with a long, multiple wet report. Vertebrae chain-fired out through the skin of his back in a neat ascending row. Gold slick knuckles of bone popping free one after another like buttons off a coat. The third managed 1 syllable of a battle hymn. A palm closed over his skull, and the hymn ended in a pressure change. The skull did not crack. It surrendered all at once, the way an egg surrenders, and everything an immortal keeps inside one came out through the gaps between burnt copper fingers in bright runners of gold and gray. 2 of them ran. Reasonable. Also irrelevant. He crossed 30 feet of road in a single step that left 2 smoking footprints fused into the stone, caught the first runner by the ankle, and used him entire as an instrument on the second. Bronze on bronze, divinity on divinity, 3 full swings, and after the third, neither body held a working geometry. Arms bent at new addresses, a jaw relocated to a shoulder, 2 rib cages staved so deeply into one another that the soldiers had functionally merged. He let the wreckage drop. It lay in the road leaking gold from 40 places, still twitching, immortal nerves sending dispatches to limbs that had been discharged without honors. A 6th landed the only blow of the evening. A blessed edge swung 2-handed that bit a finger's width into one forearm where spears had been splintering all night. The stranger looked at the cut, then at the soldier. The look was the worst part, the survivor would say. 4 hands took that soldier at the shoulders and the hips, and the pull was not fast. That was the obscenity of it, the patience. Divine tendon resisting, then singing, then failing, and the soldier left the world in 2 pieces and a long unspooling of golden viscera that steamed on the cold stones like a butchered ox's. The rest died in the order they reached him, and the manner stopped mattering. Not 1 drop of any of it touched the chain line. Every blow had an angle, and every angle was a choice, and 40 mortals stood untouched in a falling mist of gold, while the patrol that owned them was disassembled around their ears like scenery being struck. The last soldier did not fight. He sat down in the road. Not strategy. His bladder had failed him, and his legs had resigned, and his mind had filed the entire scene under things that are not happening. He fixed his eyes on a sandal buckle lying in the gore. Just a buckle, bright and ordinary, and held on to it the way drowning men hold driftwood. Up the slope, horns, the garrison of Othris emptying its gates. 300 God-forged soldiers pouring down the switchbacks with hymns rising and torches streaming. The stranger watched them come, all 6 fists closed. He did not go up to meet them. He hit the mountain. One blow downward, full into the road's bedrock, and Othris split. The shoulder of the mountain opened along a brand new fault with a sound that was less a sound than the ground's own voice breaking, and the switchbacks, the gates, the descending column, the hymns and the torches, all of it slid sideways into a chasm that had not existed one heartbeat earlier and existed now the way rivers exist, permanently. Dust climbed a mile. The horns stopped on a held note. 300 soldiers of Olympus became a geological layer. And as the dust climbed, far to the north, on a peak that should not have been visible at that distance, a crown of light, cold white, seated on the world's highest shoulder like a held breath, stuttered, dimmed, flared, dimmed again, in rhythm, in his rhythm. Strength moved through him that he had not paid for, a warm surge up the spine, power arriving from nowhere into a body that had been running on embers. He flexed one of the 6 hands, watched the gold light steady along the forearm, and filed the evidence the way tired soldiers file evidence. Conveniently, it was coming back, his own strength, returning. The 4 extra arms folded into him like a decision being put away. The fire banked, soot gray again, 2-armed again, swaying on his feet. He turned to the chain line, and 40 mortals learned what it is to be looked at by the thing that just happened. He came to the girl first, knelt, took the neck chain in 2 fingers and broke it the way a man snaps a stem, with a care nobody present would have dared ask for. The links rang on the stones. He set the broken collar down beside her gently, as if it might still hurt her if it landed wrong. Down the line, chains parted in his hands like rotted rope. The girl stared up at him, at the coal light banked in his eyes, and did not run. "Go home," he told her, the molar's deep voice gone quiet, not gentler, just smaller. Then he walked north along the tribute road, toward wherever it ended, and the only soldier of the Othris garrison, still possessed of a pulse, sat in the cooling gold and watched him go, holding his buckle. Smoke from the split mountain climbed high enough to be seen from the throne of the world. Hermes had watched the second half of it from altitude, wing-sandaled, motionless, a courier's eye recording at a courier's speed. And then he had flown, fast even by his own vain standards, and made one stop before the summit. Protocol. A report on a stranger begins with the stranger's thread. Name, length, and the appointed cut. So he had gone to the 3 sisters in their cave of turning shadow and asked, as he had asked 10,000 times before, for the thread. The loom had jammed. He stood now on the marble lip of the great hall, and the assembled light of the gathered gods turned toward him. And Hermes, fast-tongued, sure-handed Hermes, who had delivered declarations of war with a grin, found his hands unsteady on his own staff. "There is a stranger on the Othris road," he reported upward to the throne and the storm seated upon it. "He has killed your patrol. He has killed your garrison. He has split the mountain that held it." A breath, because the next part was the part that mattered, and the messenger god knew weight when he carried it. "And the fates cannot find him. The loom will not take his thread." He walked north through the last of the night, and the night did what nights do. It ended. Gray first in the east, the color of cold ash. Then a thin line of bronze along the hills, as if the world were holding the day up for inspection before agreeing to it. The road emptied ahead of him. That was the new fact of the morning. Word had outrun him in the dark. Word always does. A story needs no sleep and carries no wounds. And the villages along the tribute road stood open-doored and silent, bread still on tables, goats bawling at fences, the people already gone up into the hills with whatever they could carry. He passed through one such village at first light and touched nothing, and the village held its breath anyway. His body kept its own ledger as he walked. The cut on his forearm, the one the blessed edge had left, had not closed. It had not even tried. Every other hurt his flesh had ever taken had been paid off within hours. This one sat open and thin and patient, a debt in a currency he didn't recognize yet. He had not slept since before the fall. He had not eaten since before the sky. The borrowed warmth from the mountain had burned down to coals again, and the coals were all he had, and he spent them one step at a time. By mid-morning, the road began to descend, and the air picked up salt. The wall was waiting where the road pinched between a chalk headland and the sea. 500 soldiers of the God-forged kind, shields locked across the pass in ranks 10 deep. Bronze running with morning light that was not entirely the morning's. Banners, spear points in their thousands, angled with parade precision. In front of them all stood a herald in white, holding a staff in one hand and a scroll in the other. And his voice had been built by some god to carry across battlefields, so it carried. By decree of the Thunderer, Lord of the Sky, King of all that, where is the top? The herald stopped. The question had come out flat, not a challenge, not a roar. A man asking directions in a voice that arrived through the bones of the feet. What? Your master. The stranger kept walking as he said it, unhurried, soot-gray, two-armed, looking like something the tide had refused. The highest one, the one the chains feed. Where? The herald recovered the way professionals do, by returning to the script. You do not summon Olympus, creature. Olympus summons you. You will kneel. You will be bound. You will be judged for the... Out of my way. The wall did not move. Walls don't. It was the last decision 500 soldiers ever made as a group. What followed was not the mountain road. The mountain road had been a detonation. This was weather. He went through the formation at a walk, and the walk never changed tempo, and the ranks came apart around him like wet paper around a stone. A shield line 10 deep is a machine for stopping force, and he was not force this morning. He was fact. The first rank learned it as the Legion had. A champion in gilded scale stepped out to meet him and was open from collarbone to hip by one passing backhand, his bronze parting with his body inside it, ribs unzipping in a spray of gold. And the stranger had already gone by before the two halves agreed to fall. Spears shattered on his shoulders, and he did not bother cataloging them. A captain's skull burst against his palm like overripe fruit, gray and gold down the man's own banner. He took a warhammer blow across the back, full swing, blessed haft, and that one he felt a dull red note through the ribs. And he paid for it by catching the hammer's owner at the jaw and removing the jaw in the head above it and most of the column of the neck below it in one wet ascending motion. It took the time it takes to walk through a gate. When he came out the far side of 500 soldiers, perhaps 60 were still upright, and those 60 were now running in directions that had nothing to do with orders. He left them their directions. The herald stood alone in the road, white robes painted gold to the waist, scroll still raised in a hand that no longer remembered holding it. The stranger stopped beside him, looked at him. The herald's bladder announced its resignation down his leg. Tell the top, the stranger said, to stop sending walls. Then the sea left, not receded, left. The whole bay inhaled. Water peeled back from the shingle in a long, withdrawing roar. Ships in the harbor below tilting onto their keels in suddenly naked mud. Fish flapping in silver panic across half a mile of seabed that had not seen the sun since the world was poured. The stranger turned toward the horizon, and the horizon stood up. He came a scale first, a swell that climbed and kept climbing past the size of swells, past the size of hills, until it wore a torso, shoulders, a beard of falling white water, the height of a temple, eyes the green-black of the deep places where light goes to die. The trident in his fist was older than the coastline. The voice, when it came as the sea's own voice, which is to say it came from everywhere, and was very calm and was not calm at all. "Little murderer," the god looked down at the gold-painted shingle, at the bodies, at the ruin of his brother's soldiers leaking into his tideline. "You have put blood in my water." The stranger rolled his shoulders. Somewhere inside him, the tired thing that had been walking all morning sat down, and the other thing stood up. "Are you the top?" The sea god laughed, and the laugh broke windows in a fishing town 2 miles down the coast. "I am the brother of the top, little murderer. For you, that is more than enough." He was almost right. That was the tragedy of the afternoon. He was very nearly right. The opening exchange took the beach. The trident came down like a falling cliff, and the stranger met it on crossed forearms, and the shingle for 100 yards in every direction simply ceased to be shingle, blasted to powder, the headland cracking, the herald hurled off his feet and rolling. The stranger stopped the blow. The blow cost him. The old cut on his forearm tore wider, and 3 new ones opened beside it. Divine metal again, the patient kind of wound. And before he had finished cataloging that, the god's free hand arrived like the tide and closed around his whole torso and squeezed, and ribs went, 4 of them, with the deep green stick agony of things breaking inside a fist. The stranger answered by breaking 2 of the god's fingers backward at the knuckle, a sound like ship masts snapping. And the sea god made a noise no one had heard him make in an age, and reconsidered the grip and chose a different argument. He took the stranger down into the returning sea, down through the green and into the black, dragging him by one leg the way a fisherman hauls a net, down to where the water stops being water and becomes weight. And there, on the drowned floor of his own kingdom, the god went to work. The sea's whole mass was his fist now. He drove the stranger into the bedrock and held him there, and let the deep do the killing, pressure folding the chest, the broken ribs grinding, lungs flooding cold and total, light a rumor far above. The trident found him through the murk and went through his side, through into the rock beneath, and pinned him to the floor of the world like a specimen. This is what it is to fight the ocean. The ocean does not tire. The ocean does not bleed. The ocean simply continues, and you do not. The stranger's vision went to black at the edges, then to black everywhere. The coals were out, and in that flooded dark, with his heart stuttering towards silence, the rhythm reached him, a pulse, not his, arriving from somewhere impossibly far to the north, through rock and water and the marrow of the world. A beat laid under his own failing one, steadying it like a hand laid over a hand. Warmth poured down the channel of his spine, vast and ownerless, and his coals did not rekindle so much as get replaced wholesale by someone else's fire. His eyes opened in the black and were not coals now. They were noon. He took the trident's haft in both hands, then in 4 more. The arms came out of him down there in the dark with a glow that lit the seafloor for a mile. 6 fists on the shaft of the sea god's own weapon, and he pulled it out of his side and out of the bedrock in one motion that boiled the water around him white. The god felt the change through the water the way you feel a swimmer's panic stop. He drove his palm down to pin the thing again, and the thing caught his thumb and broke it, and used the broken thumb as a handhold and began to climb. What ascended through the water column over the next several heartbeats was witnessed by nothing with a spine, which was a mercy. 6 arms climbing the body of the ocean's god, breaking grips as they came, finger by finger, the deep cracking with each snap. Up the forearm, up the shoulder, and the sea god, for the first time in the life of the sea, pulled backward, upward, surfacing, trying to put sky between himself and what was attached to him. They breached together in a tower of white water, and the god was smaller now. Gods condense when they are wounded, pulling themselves tight to hold their seams, and he came down onto the broken beach at a mere 4 men's height, bleeding gold from 8 fingers, and found the stranger already standing where he was going to land. The trident came around one last time, a king's full thrust, everything the ocean had. The stranger caught it between 2 palms. The stop was absolute. The recoil of all that arrested mass had to go somewhere. So it went back up the haft and through the god's arms and cracked both his elbows audibly. And in the half-second of his shock, the stranger pivoted, wrenched, and the weapon changed religions. 3 tines took the sea god through the chest and carried him backward off his feet and into the chalk headland, and through its face and into its heart, pinned, his own trident standing out of him at the angle of a planted flag. The stranger climbed the haft. He stood on the crossbar with the god's face below him, and the god looked up at him with the green-black eyes gone wide and shallow, and said quietly, the sea asking the only question the sea had left, "What are you?" He didn't answer. He went in, 6 hands at the wound's edges, and he opened the god of the sea along the trident's 3 entries the way you open a wreck. Bronze-bright divine flesh tearing in sheets, ribs beneath it, not bone but reef, white and branching and old, snapping off in his fists in wet coral handfuls. Inside was not meat, inside was ocean. Tides moved in there, gray-green and breathing, lungs hung like 2 harbors. Ropes of viscera came away in his hands as kelp and muscle braided together, slicking the chalk below in coils that steamed. Brine and ichor left the body together as weather, a falling golden rain. And at the center of the open chest, where a heart would be, a maelstrom turned, a fist-sized gyre of black water, spinning, ancient, the engine of every current on the earth. The god was still alive. Gods are. He watched, pinned and opened, as the stranger reached into him and took hold of the turning thing. "Wait," said the sea. The stranger closed his fist. The maelstrom went out like a wrung cloth, black water bursting between burnt copper fingers. And at that exact instant, everywhere, the sea stopped. Not the bay, the sea. The tide quit mid-pull on 1,000 coastlines at once. Currents that had run since the first morning of the world stood down without notice. Around the headland, the water went from green to gray in a spreading stain, fast as dye, racing toward both horizons. And the surface forgot how to wave, settling into a flat, dead shine like hammered tin. Fish began to rise, not in dozens, in acres, silver fields of them, bellies up, lifting out of the depths in slow constellations as far as the eye could carry. The smell arrived after, salt going stale, the breath of a thing that had stopped breathing. The god's body sagged against the tines. The green-black eyes paled to the gray of the water, and the vast condensation of him began, very slowly, to run, his edges going liquid, the corpse weeping itself down the chalk in long, brackish streams, emptying like a hold hull. Up on the headland, an old fisherman lay flat in the gorse where he'd thrown himself, and looked at what the bay had become, and his mind did its level best. "The tide's just late," he told himself. "Tide's late sometimes." His grandfather had said that, said the sea was a woman and kept her own hours. He looked at the silver acres of dead fish. He looked at the flat tin shine going out to the edge of the world. He looked at the mountain-sized dead thing nailed to the cliff, leaking the ocean out of its chest. "Tide's just late," he thought, with his whole strength, and his hands would not stop shaking. And somewhere below him, his boat sat on dead water that would never rock it again. The news reached the great hall before the rain of brine had finished falling. There was a long table on the height of the world and 12 seats around it, and now there were 11 gods in an empty chair, and the silence around that chair had a pressure that made lesser immortals in the colonnades quietly find errands elsewhere. The Thunderer sat at the table's head and did not rage. That was the worst available sign. His knuckles rested on the armrest, white, motionless, and when he finally spoke, it was with the flat administrative calm of a king who has already moved past grief into arithmetic. No god has died today. The hall held still. Down the table, a gray-eyed goddess watched her father and said nothing, and missed nothing. Hear the shape of it, the king of the gods continued, because every temple in the world will speak it with one mouth by dawn. The sea is not dead. The sea is poisoned. A calamity has come out of the sky, a venom thing, a render of waters, and it has struck at the deep, and our beloved brother labors now in the abyss to heal what it wounded. Olympus grieves with the fishermen. Olympus will restore the tide. A pause, knuckles whitening one shade further. And Olympus requires tribute doubled, that the healing be swift. The messenger god took the decree without meeting anyone's eyes. By nightfall, it would be in every sanctuary on 3 coasts. By dawn, it would be true, the way things are true when they are said in 40,000 temples at once. There was no dead god. There had never been a dead god. There was only the calamity, and the dying sea was its venom, and the doubled chains on the tribute roads were medicine. The stranger knew none of it. The lie was already running, and he had never even heard its footsteps. He stood in the shallows beneath the open corpse as the light went long and copper, 6 arms folding back into 2, wounds smoking where the trident had written on him. The side, the forearms, the ribs that grated when he breathed. The borrowed fire was banking again, draining back down whatever channel had brought it, and as it went he felt the rhythm one more time, the far pulse northward, stuttering, flaring when his fury flared, guttering as it banked. He flexed his hand, watched the glow steady and fade along the forearm, and filed it the same way he'd filed it on the mountain. His strength, coming back, nothing more. He was no closer to her than he had been 2 nights ago. Behind him, far out on the dead flat water, the storm mass the fight had raised, a god's worth of displaced sea with no god left to call it home, finished standing up and began mindlessly to fall toward the coast. He heard it come, a long, toneless, gathering hush, like the world drawing breath through its teeth. He didn't look back. The light flickered again on the northern rim of the world, and he stepped out of the dying water and followed it. The dead were walking his road. He had been seeing them since the drowned coast. Faintly at first, the way breath shows before the cold is felt. Gray figures on the verges, gray figures in the ruined surf line, all drifting the same direction, with the unhurried obedience of smoke finding a chimney. By the second ridge, they were a column. By the river gorge, they were a nation. The wave he had not looked back at was arriving now, soul by soul, and every one of them passed him on the road like an itemized bill. A sailor with his lungs still full, staring as he went by. A tax clerk from the flooded port, still counting on his fingers. Soldiers from the wall, his soldiers, the ones he had unmade in the morning light, flinching out of the column's order to put distance between themselves and the thing that had sent them here. The dead do not feel much. They felt enough for that. Everything he had killed this week was waiting in line. He would have kept walking north past all of it. He had a direction. The direction was the only possession he had left. But in the gray column, far ahead, something was not gray. A young woman's shade, drowned like the rest. A pilgrim's cord still knotted at her waist, and a small clay token clutched to her chest. A sun disk, the same sigil the tribute standard had carried on the mountain road. And around her, turning slowly, the way a strand of dawn might turn if dawn were a thread, a spiral of warm gold light. And the wrecked thing on the road stopped breathing for a moment. The warmth coming off that small coiling light was not this world's warmth. It was older than his wounds. It was the temperature of a hand he had not held in 12,000 years, and his body answered it before his mind could intervene. Chest seizing, vision swimming, 3 days of sleeplessness rising up at once. That was the explanation he chose, and he chose it fast, the way a man slams a door. Exhaustion, a fraying mind, painting home onto a stranger's soul. Nothing more. He followed her anyway, down the gorge, down to where the river Acheron ran black under a sunless overhang, and the column of the dead poured over the bank like grain into a hold. The lower rooms do not keep the sun's hours. Time below is measured in the body, the grind of 4 broken ribs, the slow fire of the trident wound, the 3rd night without sleep arriving as a thin singing in the ears. And something else was missing down here, and he noticed its absence the way you notice a silence. The northern warmth, the pulse that had been finding him at his worst, could not reach this deep. For the first time since the mountain, he was running on nothing but himself, and himself was almost spent. At the waterline, the dead changed. Above ground, each shade had trailed a hair of silver upward into nothing. Fate's filament, the loom's long property line. At the river's edge, the thread simply ended, cut, the pale ends drifting like roots torn from soil. The gate wardens, tall and faceless in funeral bronze, checked each soul's severed thread as it passed. He walked through their checkpoint, and they found nothing to check. No thread, no cut, no record that the loom had ever owned him. 2 faceless helms turned to follow him and kept turning long after their necks should have stopped. The ferryman took one look at him, planted his pole, and pushed the boat backward into the dark, fast for a being with eternity to spend. So he waited, down the bank and into Acheron, the river of woe closing over his head, and he walked the bottom the way a man crosses a stream, because he had already drowned once this week and it had not taken. The dead lined both banks to watch a living thing do that. They had nothing else to feel. They felt that. The hound met him on the far shore. 3 heads, each the size of a fishing boat, all the heat of the underworld in its throats. It did its job. He let it. Then 6 hands closed, 3 muzzles clamped shut, 1 knee on the great neck. And he held the animal down without temper until the thrashing stopped and the growl ran out of conviction. He let go. The hound backed away, whining in 3 keys, and the gates behind it stood open. Because in this house, the gates only ever needed to keep things in. The hall of the host of many was black basalt, veined with gold, lit by torches that burned cold, roofed in dark that had a texture like the inside of a closed eye. Wealth everywhere. The riches of the earth belonged to the earth's landlord. And in the center of that wealth, dressed in pearl and white coral hauled up from a sea that no longer moved, stood a bier. God-sized, prepared, empty. 3 days, said the dark on the throne. I have kept that ready. Hades did not look like his brothers. The sea had been scale and the sky was storm. This one was stillness in a robe of falling shadow, a crown of black gold, a long, pale claiming hand resting on a bident, whose 2 tines had pinned older things than mountains. His voice had the courtesy of a host and the temperature of a vault. Drowned men arrived in their thousands and told me what came out of the sky. Garrison dead told me what walked through them, and I sat in my own hall, and I kept a room for my brother, and I waited for the sea to come down to me the way everything comes down to me. The crown tilted 1 degree. Nothing came. Do you understand what you did up there in the light? You did not kill him. There is no shade of Poseidon in any field of mine. There is no shore where my brother waits. You spent him. He is nowhere, forever. And the mountain. The courtesy cracked just once, along 1 syllable. The mountain tells the temples he is in the deeps, healing. My house keeps an arithmetic the mountain has chosen to forget. The wrecked thing stood among the gold and said flatly, with the last of a 3-day voice, he stood between. He was the sea. Then the sea should have moved. The cold torches leaned. The dark got close. You have died before, said Hades, softer now, professional now. It is on you like a smell, twice at least, flesh that has been through my colleague's hands and walked out unfiled. Whatever failed to keep you elsewhere, little furnace, was an amateur. Kneel. You are owed to a house like mine, and this is the house, and I am calling in the dead. The claim came down on him like the river had, a jurisdiction, a weight on the soul itself, and found nothing to sign, no thread, no file, no standing. The pressure slid off him the way water slides off a hot stone, and the king of the dead, for the first time in an age, raised the Biden off the floor. Then we will do it the long way. He did not start with soldiers. He started with art. The dark beside the bier folded, took weight, took shape. Grave clay and shadow drinking straight from the furnace of the intruder's grief, sculpting what it found at the top. A woman, small against the hall, dark hair, a way of standing with her weight on one hip that no artist could have invented, because it was not invented, it was remembered, it was stolen. She looked at him with borrowed eyes and said, in a voice that was almost right, Asura! The name landed in the hall like a dropped blade. It was the first time this world had spoken it, and the world had said it in her mouth, and that was the cruelest possible address for it. Asura did not move. The shape crossed the gold floor to him, and the hall put a spear of grave iron in her hands, and he watched her come and did nothing. And when she put the spear through him, high through the meat below the collarbone, grave metal grinding past the broken ribs and out the back, he took it standing, both fists shaking at his sides, eyes open, because the hands would not rise against that face even now, even here, even knowing. She drew the spear back for the second thrust. My dead, he said, quiet, ruined, certain, are not in your house. It was true, and the truth went through the art like frost through a pane. His dead had died a sky away, under different stars, owned by no loom and no landlord here. Whatever this was, it had never been her, and the grief it was drinking from suddenly refused to pour. The shape lost its borrowed weight all at once, clay running, shadow exhaling, and as it dropped, he caught it, both arms. Unnecessary care. He went down on one knee to lower the slumping wet ruin of the counterfeit to the gold floor as gently as a man laying down the real thing. And that gentleness in that place was the most frightening act the hall had witnessed yet. Then he stood up, and the other 4 arms came out, and the house answered with everything it had. The Currys dropped from the dark roof first, carrion sisters, iron-feathered, talons like gaffing hooks, shrieking on the frequency of grief. He caught the first out of her dive by both wings and pulled. The wings left her with a shoulder girdle attached and a 4 arms length of spine swinging from the root, and the rest of her traveled on without them and burst against a pillar in a spray of black blood and old gravity. The second he folded backward at the waist until her own talons came out through her sternum from inside. The third made it to his throat, and he closed one hand on her skull and one on her hips and simply brought his hands together, and what hit the floor was a single wet iron mass with feathers. Then the honored dead, Hades' house legion, heroes of bronze ages, and the king of the dead spent his power like coin and granted them full flesh for the fight, which meant they could scream like men and come apart like men. They did both. A champion who had once held a famous pass swung a famous axe. The rising backhand that met him took him apart at the waist, and the lent flesh did everything flesh does. the gray gold loops of him pouring out across the floor, before all of it remembered it was smoke and went back to being smoke. A phalanx came on in good order, and 2 of the 6 arms swept the front rank, and 8 rib cages collapsed inward as one cord. Lungs Hades had loaned them, bursting in a row of red coughs that turned to mist before they landed. Heads burst against palms. Spines exited backs. The hall filled with the smell of a battlefield, and then unfilled. The gore evaporating off the gold even as it spread. A slaughterhouse erasing itself in real time, which was worse somehow than if it had stayed. Hades came through his own dissolving army with the Biden at full extension, 2 tines and the mass of the underworld behind them. Asura caught it between 2 palms. The stop rang the whole house like a struck bell. He had caught a king's weapon at the edge of the sea 2 days ago. He caught this one the same way and broke it the same way. The haft of the world's oldest landlord snapping in his fist with a crack that made the cold torches gutter and the dark overhead flinch like a struck animal. And the king of the dead played the last card any death has. He closed the distance inside a thought and drove the long, pale claiming hand into the intruder's chest. Not through the flesh, into it, the way a hand goes into water, and took direct hold of the soul. What he touched is on record nowhere, because Hades never spoke of it whole. The dead who were present say only that the unseen one screamed in his own hall. He had reached for a soul and found a stairwell. Grief going down past the bottom of where grief ends. 12,000 years of it, landing below landing. Every step load-bearing, every step on fire. A burning that did not consume because it refused on principle to finish. And at the very bottom of the stairwell, impossibly far down, a small light, shaped like a child's sleeping face, with a coil of warm gold turning around it, slow as a strand of dawn. The same spiral that had walked past a god-killer on the road above, wrapped around a drowned pilgrim girl. Hades tore his hand back out. What came out was no longer a hand. It was calcined to the mid-forearm, burned white, burned dry. The fingers fused mid-clutch into a single curled rictus, smoking with a smoke that smelled of nothing at all. And immortal flesh does not burn, has never burned. And this had burned in a way that was already, visibly, never going to heal. The Lord of the Dead went down against the steps of his own throne, cradling the ruin against his chest, and his crown was crooked, and his breath came in the short, shocked pulls of a being learning. Very late in eternity, what a wound is. He looked up at the 6-armed silhouette standing in the evaporating wreckage of his house's pride, and the look on the death god's face was not hatred. "Out," said Hades. The word came out small. He said it again, and the whole house flinched. "Out! There is no room in my halls for what you are carrying. I house the dead. I do not house that. Take it up. Take it out of my dark and back into the light where it belongs, and do not—" The fused white claw tightened against his chest. "Come down here again." The gate stood open before he finished. The dead made a corridor 100 shades wide. Death itself had declined him. The stair out of the lower rooms is long. The dead descend it for an age and call the age a moment. And Asura climbed it the way he did everything now, in installments, one fist closing on the rock above the other, the spear hole and the trident hole, and the ribs all keeping their separate counsel. The 4 extra arms had folded away. The furnace was banked to almost nothing. He climbed in the dark on the last of himself. He was a third of the way up when he realized the dead coming down were getting out of the way of something other than him. It came up out of the deeper dark below, from below the fields, below the rivers, from depths the dead themselves are not sent, climbing the same stair in the opposite direction of everything. A man, mortal framed and nowhere near mortal. Skin the white of cold ash from scalp to heel, a red mark riding it like a wound's memory, and seared into the flesh of both forearms. Fused there, healed wrong on purpose. Chains. Blades at his back with embers living in the metal. The shades on the stair pressed themselves into the rock to let him pass, and they whispered as they did it, because the dead knew this one. The dead had carried him twice and twice been wrong, and the name they whispered was Spartan. 10 steps apart, both of them stopped. No greeting, no challenge. 2 storms reading each other's weather. The Spartan's eyes went to the intruder's forearms, to the thin divine metal cuts that had stayed open for 3 days, ink that would not fade, and something moved behind the pale face, and his own thumb dragged once, slowly, along the chain where it entered his flesh. Punishment, recognizing punishment. Then his eyes went lower, to the fist. Asura was not making a fist at him. The fist was just there, closed at his side the way it had been closed since the coast, since the road, since the fall. Closed around nothing, held the way a climbing man holds the next grip before he has found it. The shape of a man going up. The shape of a man going up toward someone. The Spartan went very still. Each of them looked once at the other's ash, the gray of a burned mountain on one, the white of a burned family on the other, and each of them looked away from it at the same time, because some mirrors you do not stand in front of. Kratos stepped past him and went on down, toward whatever Aaron wanted doing below the bottom of the dead. 3 steps into the dark, he stopped, without turning, and his voice came back up the stair, low and even, a soldier's voice asking a soldier's question. "Who is at the top of yours?" The stair was quiet. The dead pressed to the walls were quiet. The question stood there with its hand out. Asura had a direction. He had a warmth that found him at his worst, a light that stuttered on the northern rim of the world, a spiral of dawn that had leaned toward his hand on a dead girl's soul. He had everything except the one thing the question asked for. He gave the dark no answer. He gave it his back and climbed. And far above, as the black began to thin toward the gray of the upper rooms, the pulse found him again, faint, northern, stuttering like a held breath, arriving in the exact silence where an answer should have been. He came up out of the earth at dawn, and the dawn did not help. Day 4. The body kept its books with a clerk's spite now, 4 ribs grinding on every breath, the trident's hole in his side, the grave spear's hole below the collarbone, the forearm cuts holding their thin red lines open like unpaid accounts. The northern pulse was faint that morning, fainter than it had been, and by noon it had gone quiet altogether, and he filed the quiet the way he filed everything. Borrowed strength, fading again. He walked north on his own dregs through high country going gold and cold, and the light crossed the sky, and the shadows swung from his left side to his right. And at dusk, on a shelf of rock above the tree line, there was a fire. The Spartan sat on the far side of it. Whatever he had gone down below the dead to find, he had come back up without it, or with it. The pale face filed no reports. He looked at the wreck standing at the edge of his firelight, looked back into the flames, and moved a spitted hair a hand's width along the stone. Not an offer, an absence of objection. Asura sat. For a long time the fire did all the talking. It was good at it. Pine knots cracking, sap hissing, sparks going up to die among foreign stars. 2 sets of forearms caught the light across the flames. One seared with chains that had healed wrong on purpose. One written over with thin divine cuts that would not close. And neither man looked at the others, having already looked once, on the stair, and found the inventory familiar. Asura ate because the body demanded payment. The heat worked into him slowly, joint by joint, and somewhere in that slow unlocking, the night did a cruel and gentle thing. The fires crackled, deepened, rounded, became for one breath the sound of a brazier in a stone room 12,000 years away. Cedar smoke, a child's hum riding under it, a half-finished song she never hurried. "Father, you are making the face again." His hand around the hair bone stopped. The face she meant was the one he was making right now. The war face, the climb face, the one she used to press her thumb between his brows to undo, as if wrath were a wrinkle in cloth. The most dangerous thing in two worlds sat at a fire with his eyes open, and was, for the length of one indrawn breath, nobody at all. Just a father, listening to a hum the wind was doing an imperfect impression of. The Spartan watched the killer's face do something, faces like that are not built to do. He said nothing about it. He fed the fire. "You climbed towards someone." Kratos said it to the flames, flat, the way a man names weather. "On the stair, your fist." His chin moved half an inch toward Asura's hand, which was closed at his side the way it was always closed. Around nothing, gripping the next hold before finding it. Men make that shape for one reason. The fire cracked. Asura looked into it for a long time. "My daughter." The first time he had said it aloud in this world, the words came out with rust on them. Mithra. The name sat in the air between them, small and warm, like something carried a long way in cupped hands. The Spartan received it the way you receive a thing of value, without touching it. The silence afterwards stretched and stretched, and just before it became permanent, he paid the toll in kind. Calliope. One word. He did not look up from the fire when he said it. His thumb dragged once, slowly, along the chain where it entered the flesh of his forearm. The same gesture from the stair, punishment checking that punishment was still attached. "Where is she?" Asura asked. Kratos turned his arm so the firelight crossed it. White from scalp to heel, the Spartan. White like cold ash, because it was ash. "Here," he said. The fire spat. Far down the black valley, an owl asked its one question and got no answer. "My hands were faster than my eyes." The voice stayed level the whole way, which was the worst available way for it to stay. "There was a temple. There was a red knight. My wrath went through the door first, and I followed it. And when my eyes caught up..." The sentence stopped. He let it lie where it fell. He picked up a branch and broke it and gave both halves to the fire, and the fire took them the way it takes everything. Then he looked across the flames, and the look went into Asura like the grave spear had, finding the gap in the ribs. "When you reach who holds her, let your eyes arrive before your hands. Mine did not." A beat. "That is the whole of what I know." Asura held the look and gave back nothing, because there was nothing in him that believed it applied. His wrath had angles. His wrath had never once, in 12,000 years, touched the thing it was for. The warning slid off him the way the river had, the way the death god's claim had, heard, filed, and shelved in the room where he kept other men's mistakes. Kratos saw it not land. Something old moved behind the pale face. Not offense. Recognition. He had shelved it once, too. The fire burned down, and the body, fed and warmed in 4 nights past empty, finally called in its oldest dead. Asura's eyes closed between one breath and the next, mid-sit, the way soldiers sleep, and the god-killer slept for the first time since falling out of the sky. He dreamed in fragments of brazier light, a thumb pressed between his brows, the song, unhurried, finishing this time. The Spartan kept the fire alive and watched the dark for him, and if anyone had asked him why, he would not have answered, and the not answering would have been the answer. He slept through the deep of the night. He slept through the small, cold hours. He slept through the sound, very far off on the north road below, of wheels. Dawn, day 5, came up the color of old bone, and they walked. Neither asked. The road was simply the same road, and neither of them was the kind that yields one. By midday, the tribute road had climbed into a country of gray crags and wind, and the road bent around a shoulder of rock, and there it was, a sanctuary, squat stone, old, and over its door, in gold leaf going green at the edges, the sun disk, the same sigil the tribute standard had carried on the mountain road, the same disk the drowned pilgrim had held to her chest in the river of the dead. The chains and the light had always shared an address, and the address was here, and the doors stood open on darkness. The pulse in the north had been silent for 2 days. Standing in front of those doors, Asura noticed the silence the way you notice a missing tooth. He went in. The Spartan stopped at the threshold and stayed there, and put his back against the doorpost where he could see both the dark inside and the road behind. An old soldier's habit, or an old mourner's. Inside, the sanctuary was not a sanctuary. It was an instrument. The walls were lined with channels of mirror-bright bronze, every channel curving inward and down, all of them converging like the veins of a leaf upon a single stone plinth at the chamber's heart. Above, where a temple would lift a dome to the sky, this place narrowed instead into one great flue, angled, deliberate, aimed. Not at heaven generally, at a single point of it. North and up, at the highest shoulder of the world. The whole room was a lamp. Someone had built a lamp the size of a temple and aimed it at the top of the mountain, and the thing the lamp had burned for fuel had been kept on that plinth. He knew before he reached it. The body knew first, the way it always did, the breath going shallow, the hands going still. Scorched into the stone floor, radiating out from the plinth in a perfect coil, was the spiral, her spiral. The strand of dawn turn he had seen wrapped around a drowned stranger's soul. The slow gold coil the death god had glimpsed at the bottom of him, around a sleeping face, and burned his hand to the bone for touching. It was written here 100 times over, loop over loop over loop, days of it, and every line of it was black, burned out, gold gone to char, like a sun's signature written in dead ink. And on the plinth, bolted to the stone, lay chains, small ones, cuffs sized for wrists he could circle with a finger and a thumb. The metal was not iron. It had the pale, hungry sheen of the blessed edges that wrote on his flesh, and the inner faces of the cuffs were worn smooth, polished, the way metal is polished by long contact with skin. On the plinth around them, in a tidy drift, lay a handful of residue, gold gone to cinder, cooled slag of dawn in a neat little heap, like the sweepings of a fire that had been someone. Asura stood very still in the middle of the machine, and the machine of him began, item by item, to assemble it. The strength that had found him at his worst, on the mountain when his coals were out, on the sea floor with his heart stuttering toward silence, warmth arriving from the north like a hand laid over a hand, and he had flexed his fists and called it his own strength returning, because that was the cheapest available story, and he had been so tired, and he had wanted it to be true. It had never been his. It had been pulled out of a child chained to a stone, in a room built to drink her, every loop of that black coil one more day of her burning, and some of what they pulled had slipped the channels and run to him instead. Of course it had. It had been running to him her whole life. She had been here. She had been right here, on his road, in his world after all, alive. 12 days of walking away at most, feeding him through her own chains while he split mountains and called the warmth his. And the coil was black, and the gold was cinder, and the pulse had been silent for 2 days. He had walked through the entire country of the dead, shore to shore, every gray field of it. There had been no Mithra there. There had never been going to be. He knew the rule now. The empty beer had taught it to him in a king's own voice. Gods do not pass into any house when they end here. They are spent, nowhere, forever. The spiral he had followed through the lower rooms, the echo on a drowned girl's soul, turned over in his memory and refiled itself as the worst thing it could be. Not a trace of her, a fragment, her light coming apart, scattering loose through the world like ash off a pyre. The fall had brought her with him. The fall had handed her to them. And while he slept by a fire, full and warm, the lamp had finished its work. "Mithra," he said once to the burned-out room. The room had been built to carry light up a mountain. It did nothing at all with a name. What happened then was the thing the Spartan had been waiting at the door for, with his weight balanced and his hands loose, because he alone in two worlds knew the catalog of things that happened next. He had seen wrath answer this. He had been wrath answering this. The red night, the temple, the world paying for one man's grief in coin of fire. That was not what happened. The coals went out, not banked, out. The low burn that had lived behind Asura's eyes since the crater, the furnace light that leaked from him even asleep, dimmed in the space of 3 breaths to a flat slag gray, the color of a cooled weld. The heat shimmer that rode his shoulders folded down and was gone, and the air in the sanctuary went ordinary, and the ordinariness was obscene. His shoulders did not heave, his fist did not shake. 12,000 years of fire stood in the middle of a stone lamp, and quietly, completely stopped burning. And what remained standing there, in the shape of the most dangerous thing in two worlds, was the same shape with the furnace shut down. Wrath needs a destination. His had just been swept into a tidy golden pile. What is left when wrath loses its address is colder than wrath, and it does not roar, and it is not interested in the room. Kratos' hands left the doorpost. They crossed his body and closed, very quietly, on the handles of the blades at his back, the grip arriving before any decision, the body of the ghost of Sparta answering the oldest alarm it owned, because it had stood inside exactly this silence once, looking out, and it knew with a soldier's certainty what the silence was load-bearing for. He held the grip for the length of 4 heartbeats. Then he let the handles go and put his empty hands back at his sides, and the letting go cost him something visible, because nothing forged stops what gets up from this floor, and because once, on a red night, no one had drawn on him in time either, and some debts a man pays forward in the only currency he has. He stayed in the doorway. He watched. Asura crossed to the plinth and went down on one knee. He had knelt like this once before in this world. 5 nights ago, on a tribute road, 2 fingers on a chain at a child's throat, breaking it gently enough that the breaking wouldn't frighten her. The same knee, the same hands. Arrived this time after the locks. He took the small chains up off the stone, both cuffs in one fist, the way you'd gather a sleeping child's wrists, and the metal moved against his palm, and his whole body went still around what his palm reported. The chains were warm, faintly, barely. A ghost of heat down in the pale metal, the temperature of a bed someone has left, of a hand just withdrawn. The last warmth in the world that was hers, he thought, still cooling. And he had missed even that, even the cooling, by so little. He closed his fist around it as if pressure could keep it. He knelt in the burned coil of his daughter's light with her chains in his hand, and held on while the warmth went, and called it the end of her, because grief is a clerk too, and files fast and files wrong. Iron does not hold the heat of the dead. Iron holds the heat of the recent. Warm chains do not mean a pyre. They mean hours. They mean cuffs opened in the dark while a god-killer slept by a fire half a valley away. They mean a small weight lifted onto a wagon bed. They mean wheels on the North Road before dawn. Climbing toward the crown of the world, which had stuttered for 5 nights in rhythm with his fury, and which tonight, far above the man kneeling in the ashes of the lie, was quietly burning brighter than it had ever burned. He held the cooling chains and believed her gone. She was 12 hours up the mountain and still reaching for him in her sleep. The storm was waiting for them a day up the road. It stood parked on the mountain's shoulder the way a garrison stands, black banked in tears, lit from inside by slow charges that never quite became lightning, a weather system with a chain of command. The road climbed straight into it. Neither of them proposed an alternative. Neither of them had spoken since the sanctuary. The cold version walked differently. The villages they passed that afternoon did not empty because there was nothing in the air to empty them. No heat shimmer, no pressure, no animal warning rolling ahead of him. Dogs watched him go by and did not bark. That was the horror of it, for anyone equipped to read it. The furnace that had announced him across half a country was out, and what walked north now traveled without a signature, a hole in the evening shaped like a man. One fist closed around two small cuffs that had gone cold hours ago. Kratos walked half a step behind and one to the side, where you walk when you have not decided whether you are an escort or a witness. They crested the last saddle below the true ascent at full dark and found the dawn already there. The order had brought its own light. 10,000 spears of the god-forged kind stood ranked across the high meadow in formations that had not been assembled since the war against the Titans. Every blade dressed, every banner hung dead in the storm's held breath, bronze burning with that borrowed sheen that meant the forges of heaven had been running for days. Fire breaks had been trenched into the rock. Heat wards stood in pylon rows, ceramic and silver sweating frost. The order had planned for fire, meticulously, in depth. The thing that walked up the saddle was not on fire. Plans hate that. And among the formations on great sledges sat the machines, frames of black wood and silver wire, tall as siege towers, strung floor to crown with thread. Spool pillars, panel after woven panel, gray attendants moving among them with bone shuttles. The apparatus of the three sisters, requisitioned whole, dragged up a mountain and aimed at a man. The loom had come to the war. Off to the flank, on a low rise with clean sight lines, a gray-eyed figure stood beside her owl and watched the cold thing come, and said the only thing anyone heard her say that night. "It has stopped asking." Ares heard it and laughed. The war god had begged for this command, begged in the great hall, knuckles on the table, while the sea was still dying, and he stood now at the center of the line in armor the color of an open body, twice the height of his tallest soldier, joy coming off him like heat off a kiln. "Good," he said. "I never liked the talking." Asura walked into the army the way a man walks into weather. The vanguard learned the cold style first and briefly. There was no roar in it, no arms unfolding, no gold. There was only arithmetic. A champion of the first rank stepped out swinging a two-handed axe, and Asura moved inside the arc, took the knee joint with his heel, the leg folding backward through its own hinge, the pop of it audible 3 ranks deep, caught the falling man's own axe and returned it through the bottom of his jaw and out the crown of his helmet, bronze and skull leaving together as one keyhole-shaped exit. A thrown spear came flat out of the dark. He picked it from the air without looking and sent it back through the line of its arrival, through the first soldier's sternum, the second's throat, and a hand's depth into the eye socket of a third, 3 men strung on one shaft, the last one still walking 2 steps, with his comrade's weight before all of it went down. A captain grabbed his shoulder. Asura took the arm off at the elbow, a wet twist, no leverage wasted, and used it as a club on its owner until helmet and head agreed to occupy the same bowl. He did all of it at a walk, in silence, eyes the color of cooled slag, and the front rank of the army of the dawn began, in places, to come apart. Not in flight, in posture, men leaning back from a thing their bodies had identified faster than their training could overrule. Then Athena's geometry closed, and the night stopped pretending this was a battle. The frames fired. Cables of woven gray came off the spool pillars from 9 directions at once. Fate stuff, thread thick as a man's wrist, and none of it tried to hold him. It could not. There was nothing of him in the loom to grip. The cables took the mountain instead. They anchored into bedrock behind him, beneath him, beside him, and closed on his limbs as pure dumb mass. The world itself recruited as a manacle, slabs of the planet lashed to his wrists. He broke the first 3. The next 30 arrived while he was breaking those, and the next 90 after that, the attendant shuttles flying, the frames groaning, the whole night sewing. And then the pikes. They came in volleys off the second line, and they were not bronze, pale metal, hungry, the kind that wrote, the kind that had marked his forearms on night 1 and never been argued off. And the first to land went through his thigh and into the rock beneath, and the wound did not begin to close. And his body told him in its flat clerk's voice that this one, like the others, was permanent ink. The second pike took his shoulder, the third his calf, the fourth went through his left palm, spreading the hand open against a slab of granite like a specimen, and on the slopes far above, visible to 10,000 upturned faces, the crown of the world flared, bright, sharp, in rhythm. It flared again on the 5th pike, again on the 6th. The soldiers nearest him glanced up at it between volleys, and some of them stopped glancing, because some patterns are better left unconfirmed. Ares came through his own ranks at a stroll, dragging a blade the length of a fishing boat, and went to work on the pin thing with the unhurried attention of a craftsman who has waited a long time for good material. He opened the chest in a long, deliberate line, riding the blade tip along the already broken ribs so the breaks would sing. He leaned on the pike in the shoulder and turned it, slow, listening. He worked with the storm. Each time he stepped back to admire, the sky came down. Zeus's lightning arriving not in strikes but in occupancy, sustained white fire standing on the pinned body for whole breaths at a time, cooking the wounds it found, the smell of it rolling down slope into the ranks, and the ranks holding formation because the alternative was admitting what the smell was. Asura did not scream. The cold did not have a scream in it. He hung on the pale pikes with his blood mapping the granite and his one free fist still closed through all of it, around 2 small cuffs. And that fist was the only argument he made. The cuffs had gone warm again. He registered it from a great distance, through the white fire, the way you register rain on a window of a burning house. Warm, faintly, like a hand laid over a hand. He filed it with the last of his bookkeeping. Residue, the final static of a spent star, leaking back down whatever channel had carried her. Even her residue was trying to reach him. That was a thing she would have done. The storm stopped being weather and became a man. He came down onto the saddle without hurry, and the army knelt in one motion, 10,000 spears dipping, and the night pressed itself flat. He was not large, the king of the gods, not the way his brothers had been large. He was concentrated, stillness with a beard of white fire, eyes like the gap between charges, and where he set his feet, the rock dried instantly for a pace in every direction. He stood over the pinned and open thing and studied it as a quartermaster studies an entry that will not reconcile. "No thread," Zeus said. The voice was conversational. The mountain carried it anyway. "No record in the loom. No shade owed to my brother's house. No claim on this soil, its mercies or its laws." A pause, administrative. "You are not of this world." His eyes ticked upward, once, to the crown on the summit, burning at a brightness it had never held, pulsing in time with the pin thing's blood, and back down, a man checking a gauge. "Hold it at the edge," he said to Ares. "Do not finish it." He had begun to turn away when the Spartan came down off the ridge. Kratos had watched for the length of 4 heartbeats, the same 4 he had spent in a sanctuary doorway with his hands on his blades. And then he had simply started walking, down through the kill zone, through an army that knew his name. 2 halberdiers were ordered into his path, The blades came off his back twice, two short sounds like a door slammed and slammed again. And the first man sat down around the new opening in him, while the second's head went one way and his decision-making went the other. And after that, the army's orders developed gaps wherever the white ash figure walked. He was not attacking. That was somehow worse. He crossed a battlefield the way a man crosses a courtroom, and he did not stop until he stood among the loom frames at the heart of Athena's geometry. The attendants scattered. Kratos looked at the nearest frame, tall as a tower, strung with finished panels, humming with tension, and put his shoulder into it. It came down with a sound like a forest dying. Spools burst, panels spilled across the rock in great woven sheets, face up under the stormlight, and what was woven on them was the war. The wall at the coast, 500 soldiers in thread, the chalk headland, the herald's white robes, woven. The sea fight, the trident, the dying god condensing, woven. The sanctuary, the lamp channels, the plinth, the small chains, woven, every scene of the last 5 days fixed in fate's own needlework, finished before any of it had happened. The order had not been improvising. The order had been performing a script, and in every panel, where the figure of the stranger should have stood, there was a hole, not a tear, a planned absence, the weave bending around a man-shaped gap. 10,000 threads routed carefully past a space they were forbidden to enter. Scene after scene built with surgical completeness around a void. "Look!" Kratos' boot came down on the frame's wreckage. He was not loud. The field had gone quiet enough that loud was unnecessary. "Your wall, your sea, your tomb." His hand moved across the panels. "Woven before you bled in them." His finger found the hole in the nearest scene. "They could not write you, so they wrote everything around you." Pinned to the granite, open to the night, Asura turned his head. It cost him visibly. He looked at the spilled fate of the last 5 days, at the void wearing his shape, and the slag-gray eyes moved across it with the terrible slowness of a man rereading a letter and finding a different letter underneath. Kratos crouched. From the burst spools, threads ran everywhere across the rock, gray and dead-colored, severed in the frame's fall. All but one. One thread crossed every panel. It ran through the wall scene, the sea scene, the tomb scene, stitched into all of them, and it was gold, and it was not severed, and it was taut. It left the wreckage at an angle, rising and went up, out of the firelight, out of the saddle, up the black ascent toward the summit. A single hair of dawn pulled tight across half a mile of night, thrumming faintly, like a string someone far above was holding. Kratos laid 2 fingers on it. "Warm," he said. The fist around the cuffs convulsed. "Dead threads are cut." The Spartan said it without inflection, an expert testifying. "The sisters cut them at the moment. I have walked the stair below twice. Every shade on it drags a cut end behind it like a leash." His fingers stayed on the gold. "This one is not cut." Up on the summit, as Ares leaned irritably on the shoulder pike again, the crown flared. "Watch it," Kratos said, and Asura watched it, and Zeus watched the Spartan, and the whole army watched the mountain. The pike turned, the crown surged. The rhythm was naked now, undeniable. 10,000 witnesses deep. It drinks you. It flared on the coast. It flared at the gates of the dead. It has flared with every bolt and every blade tonight. He rose from his crouch. "They had you pinned and opened, and the king of this mountain said, 'Hold. Ask why a god builds a war and forbids the victory.'" He stepped over the wreckage closer into the white firelight and delivered the rest the way a soldier reports casualties: flat, complete, unbearable. A war this size is not a wall. It is a bellows. The climb was never yours. They built every gate of it, every grief, and burned you at each one like fuel, because your pain is the draw that makes their lamp roar. You were not summoned here to fight this wheel. A beat. You were fed to it. The storm shifted overhead. Somewhere in the ranks a pylon hummed. Zeus had not moved, which was itself a report. The light on that mountain is not a crown, Kratos said. He looked at the gold thread, rising taut into the dark toward the summit, humming under his fingers like a held note, like a small voice keeping itself company. She is still breathing. The night held the line the way a wave holds its height. What broke first was not the cables, and it was not the pikes, and it was not the silence. What broke first was the bookkeeping. 5 days of filing, the warmth logged as his own strength, the spiral logged as exhaustion, the warm chains logged as her cooling, the residue logged as residue. 5 days of a clerk writing the cheapest available story in careful script, and every entry false, and every falsehood paid for by a child burning alone at the top of the world, while her father called the help she sent him his. The cuffs in his fist went from warm to hot. It came down the gold thread first, visibly a pulse of light running the whole taut length of it, from the summit to the wreckage. Then another, then a flood, the crown of the world guttering as it gave, browning out above the army that worshipped it, because the lamp's fuel had stopped flowing to the lamp. She had felt him at the edge. She was answering with everything. 10,000 soldiers watched their holy light dim, like a lamp running dry, and watched the glow arrive instead in the open chest of the thing nailed to their mountain. For 5 days he had spent this warmth as if it were his. He would never spend it carelessly again. The gray went out of his eyes. What replaced it was not the cold light of the first nights. It was noon. The rebuild was not gradual. Gold flooded the wounds from the inside, and the wounds objected, and the gold overruled them. The pale pikes began to rise out of his flesh on their own, pushed, smoking, the permanent ink of them staying behind as black gold script across shoulder and thigh and palm. And the fate cables lashed to half a hillside of bedrock came up taut and held, and then the hillside moved. Slabs the size of temples tore free at the anchor points. The frames that had survived Kratos came apart in a sleet of silver wire. 6 arms unfolded out of the light, and then the light kept going, past the 6, past the shape the world had cataloged. Mass arriving from somewhere mass should not arrive from. The body reforged in plates of burning gold, seams of white fire opening along every limb. The figure on the granite standing up into something the height of the siege frames it was shedding, and the shock wave of its standing went out across the saddle as a wall. The inner cordons ceased to be infantry. The nearest 40 went all at once, unseamed, bronze, and the bodies inside it leaving together, a spray of disassembled men across 60 yards of rock. Spines exited backs in rows. A phalanx's worth of shields arrived in the third-rank edge. First, with their owner's arms still strapped on. The heat wards burst in sequence down the line, like a string of frost-white drums. Ares, nearest, raised his blade out of pure reflex, and the wave took his sword arm off at the shoulder. Arm, blade, and shoulder girdle leaving as one rotating piece, golden ichor sheeting from the socket. And the god of war went down on one knee in front of his own army, with a sound no soldier present had ever heard a god make. And morale, as a strategic quantity, left the field. Athena was not in the blast radius. She had relocated her rise 90 heartbeats earlier, without comment, and stood now in clean air with her owl, watching her geometry's wreckage with the expression of an architect taking notes. And the sky changed. It went out from him in a ring, not heat, pressure, a standing gold weight that met the storm and shaved it off the heavens. The cloud tiers peeled back from the mountain in every direction, mid-charge, thunder dying half-spoken. The occupation of black weather that had owned this sky for days rolled up like a scroll being confiscated. And where it had been, from horizon to horizon above the holy mountain, stood a sheet of burning gold noon at the bottom of the night. The king of the gods, withdrawn to altitude, hung in the last surviving cell of his own storm and watched his element rescinded from his own address. In the new light, the gold figure stood among the dead, in the wreckage, in the spilled panels of a war someone had woven in advance. And it was quiet. And the quiet was the worst part, because everything in it was load-bearing. It looked up the line of the taut gold thread, up the black ascent, to the guttering crown and the storm cell above it. "You were right," it said. The voice had changed registers. It arrived in the breastbone now, below hearing, the mountain itself conducting it upward. It was not loud. It was addressed. "I am not of this world." A breath. The thread hummed. "You are not of this world." Far above, at the top of everything, the crown flared once. Sharp, bright, sustained, like an answer. He started up the last of the world while the night still technically held, under a sky that no longer answered to it. The arithmetic went with him, and the arithmetic was simple, and it was terrible. Every flame was hers. Every fist he lit was lit at her expense, a child's reserves drawn down to move a father's hand. So the rule of the climb wrote itself before the first step. Spend nothing. Spend small. Where the account must be opened, open his own body first. He climbed with the fires banked to a film of gold over the skin, the 4 lent arms folded away, the cuffs in his fist, and the thread rising taut beside the stair like a railing made of her. It was not a war anymore. Wars have 2 directions. This was distance, closing. The first toll came in the dark before dawn, as a sound, a whine of split air, here, gone, here, a blur making passes at him out of the black, each pass opening a thin line across his shoulders. The fastest thing alive, spending its last loyalty on a delaying action. He did not chase it. There is no chasing it. He stood entirely still on the stair, read 3 passes the way you read a man's breathing, and on the 4th he put his hand into the future and let the god arrive in it. His grip closed on a winged ankle moving at the speed of rumor. The ankle stopped. Nothing else did. The body attached to it whipped around the stop like a flag in a gale, and everything inside that body kept traveling. The organs arriving together against the front of the ribs with a sound like wet cargo shifting, the spine ringing down its whole length, the famous heart bursting against its own cage at full courier speed. Gold left him at every seam at once, atomized, a halo of him hanging in the air his velocity had owned a half-breath earlier. The wings on the sandals were still beating when Asura set the ruin down on the stair. They went on beating for a while, out of habit. Speed dies last. Across the whole of the world in that minute, every word in flight fell out of the air. Prayers left 10,000 altars and arrived nowhere. Oracles opened their mouths on silence. On every road in every country, travelers stopped mid-step, suddenly and totally lost, the way home gone from their feet like a coin through ice. The world did not know yet what it had lost. It only knew that it had stopped hearing from itself. The crown above barely dimmed, a candle's worth. He noted the rate and climbed. Then the dawn came early, and it came at him. It rose wrong, out of the east at a flat, hard angle, dragging the morning behind it like a net. 4 horses of white fire at full extension, and the burning car behind them aimed down the pilgrim stair. The god in the car did not bother with words. He simply opened the furnace of himself, and the mountainside took noon at a range of nothing, the stair slagging to glass runnels, boulders cracking apart along their hidden faults, the air itself catching and burning off in sheets. Asura walked up through the middle of it at the same tempo as before, a dark seam in a wall of light. And when the chariot committed to the killing pass, he reached up and took the yoke pole out of the sky. He swung the dawn. Horses, car, and God went around him in one full arc. A wheel of fire the width of the mountain's face, and into the cliff. The impact buried the morning in the mountain. Wreckage and burning tack rained down the slope. The horses tore free, screaming, and bolted riderless across heaven, with the empty car blazing behind them. And the whole eastern world looked up and watched the sun's own chariot run away on fire, with no one holding the reins. The god crawled out of the cliff face with his armor slagged into his skin. Asura was already there. He put one knee on the burning chest and opened it. Fingers into the seams the crash had started, and pull. The ribs coming up in a row like a furnace grate levered out of its housing. And inside, where a heart should have kept its small dark office, there was a coal. White, the size of a closed fist. The thing the chariot had existed to carry. The day, at its source, asleep in a cage of God. Helios screamed, and the scream came out as light, and Asura tore the coal free. It came trailing roots, arteries of fire ripping loose one by one, each snap a solar flare in miniature, prominences whipping off the breach and dying in the cold air. And the god under his knee aged 1,000 years a heartbeat, the gold going gray, the furnace body guttering to a husk of slag bronze and char around an empty grate. The coal sat in Asura's palm, weightless and absolute, lighting the bones of his hand through the flesh. He did not crush it. He had crushed a sea once, and the sea had died. He set the coal on the broken stair, gently, the way you set down something sleeping, and the coal, unhoused, with nothing left alive to carry it, rolled. Off the stair, off the edge, down through its own morning, a small private sunset falling the height of the world, and into the dead flat gray of the murdered sea on the eastern rim. Steam went up in a pillar that bent the horizon, and there the sun lay, guttering on water that would never put it out and never carry it anywhere. A hearth dying in the corpse of an ocean. Everywhere beyond the mountain, the day broke. Not ended. Broke. Noon curdled to a bruise-colored dusk from rim to rim of the world, shadows losing their owners, birds going down out of the air to roost at midday. The only true daylight left on the earth stood over Olympus in a gold column, and it was hers, and every living thing under that ruined sky turned to look at it. Above him the crown guttered hard. Once deep, the dimming of a lamp that has just paid for a sun, and Asura stopped on the stair with his fist against his sternum and stood there until it steadied. Cracks had opened along his forearms where the gold plate met the flesh, fine seams of white light, the body beginning to pay the difference out of itself. He resumed the climb. The tempo never changed. That was the horror the mountain was learning. The tempo never changed. The gate had a keeper, and the keeper was the strongest thing the mountain had left. He stood across the last doors in a lion's skin with his feet set, the one son of this house who had earned his seat with his hands. And he did not posture and he did not speak, which earned him more regard than the rest of the pantheon had managed collectively. He simply got his grip, under the arms, around the back, a wrestler's marriage. And for the first time since the storm came off the sky, Asura moved backward, half a step. The stair cracked under the effort that bought it. Then the arithmetic resumed. Asura returned the hold, and the gatekeeper's body began reporting from the inside. The floating ribs went first in pairs, then the true ribs in series down both sides, a fence going under a flood. The great shoulders that had held up the sky for a wager came out of their sockets with two deep, wet detonations. The spine bowed past its argument, and the heart, a hero's heart, oversized, magnificent, labored on in a chest that no longer had room for it, slamming itself against the wreckage like a man beating on the inside of a hull. Asura turned with him, all of him, and drove the strongest of the host backward through his own doors. Bronze older than nations burst off its hinges. God and gate landed together in the holy court beyond. The same wreckage, indistinguishable, a breach the width of a fallen sun torn straight into the heart of heaven, the lion's skin lying across the threshold like something the door had been wearing. And nowhere in the world did anything break. No sea died, no light failed, no road forgot itself. The world had never been asked to run on him. He had only ever been the house's pride, and the house was past pride now. Only the mountain flinched. Then the mountain went dark, because something had risen behind it. The king had opened the oldest cell, whatever it had cost him, and it had cost him something no ledger records, to kneel at that pit and ask. The father he had unmanned and buried under the world stood loose against the broken day, taller than the peak he shadowed, gray as the first stone, and in his fist the scythe, the old edge, the one that had ended the first sky and made room for all the others. It came down on Asura with everything a titan is. The blow landed across the holy court, and the court ceased. Terraces folding, the bedrock of heaven cratering in a ring, a column of dust standing up taller than the storm had ever been, the ridge tolling for leagues like a struck world. The sound took a long time to finish. The dust took longer. When it cleared, there was the print of the strike, pressed deep into the stone of Olympus. The scythe's edge line scored across it like a signature. In the center of the print stood Asura, mid-stride, exactly as he had been. Nothing happened. The edge that had unmade the first sky had come down, full, true, final, on the owner of the new one, and the climb had not even paused to notice. Asura's foot completed the stride it had been taking. The Titan looked down the length of his own scythe at the small gold ruin walking out of the print, and the oldest being on the field did what no god in 6 days had had the wisdom to do. Nothing. He withdrew the scythe slowly, the way a hand comes back from a snake, and stood aside and watched his son's whole kingdom fail to matter, and understood it first. The halls of the king were last, and the king spent himself like a man burning furniture. Lightning arrived as architecture, columns of it, walls of it, standing white occupancies that turned the throne court into the inside of a charge. Asura walked through it. The aegis opened, and the oldest fear in the world poured out of it and went looking for something in him to grip, and came back empty-handed. He had buried everything it knew how to hold. The king threw his arsenal in order of escalation, and then in no order at all, condensing with every spending the way gods do, paying mass for power, and last of all, when he was half his height and his hands had burned hollow, he threw the bolt. The first one, the spear of weather that had ended the age of titans, thrown true with the last full strength of the longest reign in the world. It broke on Asura's sternum, on the black gold script the pale pikes had written there, and the detonation whited out the hall. And out of the after image, the footsteps continued, unhurried in the same tempo they had kept since the saddle. Zeus was on his knees among his own scorch marks when the footsteps reached him. Small now, an old man's size in a beard of guttering fire, breath rattling in a chest that had thrown everything and kept nothing, hands open on the floor and burned to the color of the Dead Sea. He did not look up so much as fail to hold his head down. The footsteps stopped. One breath. There was a verdict for this moment. Both of them knew its wording. The king had pronounced it on a pinned and open prisoner 2 nights ago, and the prisoner had promised it back. And here, now, at the bottom of everything, was the appointed hour for it. And Asura looked down at the spent shape that had built a war out of a child and found it was no longer worth the sentence. The verdict would have cost a breath. He was not spending breaths on this. He said nothing at all. The footsteps resumed, past the throne. The king of the gods knelt in the wreck of his arsenal, alive, breathing, unkilled. and learned in real time that there is a thing below defeat, and it is being walked past. In the colonnade, gray eyes watched the king of everything be passed like weather. When the hall settled and anyone thought to look, the colonnade was empty. The stair beyond the throne was the last one. Above it there was no more mountain, only the crown, close now, near enough that its light had texture, near enough that the gold thread beside him had thickened to a humming brightness he could feel against the skin of his arm. He climbed it half unmade. One of the four len arms had guttered out somewhere below the halls. Flickered, dimmed, gone, a lamp in wind, and hung dark against his back, unlit, unrelinquished. The plates of the golden form were cracked through in fault lines of white. Ash flaked off him at the edges of every motion, off a body now openly paying out of its own substance, so the account above would not be touched. And the fist had never opened, not once. Not for the sun or the titan or the king, around two small cuffs that had gone hot as held coals. Behind and below him, through the breach where a gate and its keeper lay as one wreckage, a second shape came down into the summit of heaven. Ash-pale, blood-checked, descending out of the torn roof of the world with fresh gold drying on chain blades. Somewhere far down the mountain, a war horn had stopped that afternoon, mid-note, and stayed stopped. And the Spartan crossed the broken court without hurry, reading as he came. The guttered arm, the cracking plates, the flaking ash, the fist. The whole inventory of a man spending himself to spare a child. He had carried that ledger once. He knew the handwriting. Their paths crossed at the foot of the last stair, going opposite ways, the second time in two worlds. And this time there was no question, because every question either of them owned had been answered days ago at a fire. Kratos looked once at the small broken breathing thing, kneeling far back there in the scorch of its own arsenal. Then the blades came off his back, two short sounds like a door slammed and slammed again. And the ringing of them went up the stair after Asura and down the hall toward the king, and the mountain held its breath to hear which one would answer first. The last stair ended at light, not a door. The crown of the world had never needed one. Nothing was supposed to climb this high. And so the stair simply rose out of the mountain's shadow and into the body of the light itself, and Asura walked the final steps inside it, gold to the bone, his own cracked plates indistinguishable now from the brightness they moved through. The chamber at the summit was the sanctuary again, written across the roof of the world. He knew the architecture the way you know handwriting. Channels of mirror-bright, pale metal, converging, but where the lamp room's veins had drained one small plinth, these drank a planet, conduits wide as rivers rising out of the mountain's marrow. Every temple, every altar, every burned offering and whispered terror on the earth arriving here as light through the mountain's roots, climbing the walls in sheets, bending inward, all of it toward the center. And at the center, small as a comma in all that blazing grammar, on a throne built precise and pale to her size, she had grown. That was the first wound of seeing her. He had carried her in his fist for 6 days at one age, in 12,000 years, and a war ago she had pressed her thumb between his brows at that age. And the figure in the light was taller than his memory and thinner than anything should be allowed to be, burned down the way a wick burns down. And still, even so, even now, unmistakably, entirely her. The fist at his side began, after 7 days, to open. The light between them stood up. Far below, the same gold crossed a broken floor. The Spartan came down the hall of the king at his own pace, through the standing scorch of a spent arsenal, and the summit's light fell through the torn roof in long, bright lanes. And he walked through them the way a man walks through other people's open windows. At the end of the hall, small in the wreckage, the kneeling shape had not moved. One of them was climbing toward a reason still breathing. The other had stopped needing one a long time ago. What he had instead hung in both fists, drawn, fresh-fed, patient. Above in the body of the light, the fire gathered itself an edge, not arriving. It had always been here. It had simply not troubled until now to wear a shape. And it stood between the Father and the throne with the unhurried courtesy of a host. A flame older than form, it turned as it stood. Everything in it turned. Turning was its grammar. And within the turning ran threads, light spinning off itself in filaments past counting, drawn fine, crossing and crossing again. A loom with no frame because it had never needed one, being the thing all frames were copied from. Where a face belonged, it pressed briefly the suggestion of one. Serene, proprietary, finished. The expression of a craftsman among his inventory. 6 days. Its voice was the sound of the channels, a planet's worship arriving as one even tone. Most instruments take longer to climb a mountain I built to be unclimbable. You have been magnificent. Asura kept walking, and so thorough with my lamps. Mild, gesturing nowhere and meaning everything. The broken pantheon, the Dead Sea, the coal guttering on the eastern rim, the storm lamp, the sea lamp, the little running flame that carried words. Did you take them for the war? They were fixtures. I lit them. I have lit every god the sky has ever held, and trimmed them, and replaced them when they smoked. The brightness overhead thinned, and through it the dark beyond the roof of the world came down close, and the dark was not empty. Lamps hung in it, crowns, summit lights beyond numbering, hung at distances that made the word distance shrug and sit down. Each one a world's worship gathered to a point, each one burning over some other mountain under some other sky. A field of harvest receding past sight. Yours hung there once, the fire said gently, a fine fixture, 7 lights in it as it happens. You broke it, beautifully, every wick, the whole assembly, and the dark where it hung is still cooling. But a wheel is a cast thing, little engine. Break the wheel, and the fire that cast it pours another. The turning slowed, fond. Who did you imagine turned yours? Asura had stopped walking. The chamber priced the stillness correctly and went very quiet. You fell for 6 days. Did you never ask what you fell through? I drew you here, both of you, fuel and bellows, a match set, salvage from a broken fixture. Her light is the finest wick I have pulled from any sky. Devotion burns clean. And you, wrath is not a flaw in you that grief made. Wrath is the function you were cast for. Every gate of this climb was a stroke of the bellows, the road, the sea, the tomb they staged you, the pikes. You have been stoking me since the sky, and you have never once drawn breath that was not work. The gods had not been the war. The gods had been appliances. The war was a furnace, breathing, and the bellows had owned a face the whole time, and the face had believed it was climbing. So, said the first flame, and the threads came off it in a tide. Let us file you properly at last. The binding was not an attack, it was administration. Filaments finer than thought closed over him from every quarter of the light, each one carrying a needle's worth of the oldest authority there is, the right to write. They wove as they came. A name-shaped space opened in the weave. A thread was drawn for him. A place at the loom was prepared, the way places had been prepared for storm kings and sea kings and every burning thing this fire had ever owned. The needle came down to make the first stitch and found nothing to sew. The filaments closed on him and kept closing. Through him, past him, meeting one another on the far side, holding a man-shaped absence. The weave ran its search, and the search was vast. It went out through every register the fire kept, every ledger of every wheel it had ever poured, the full accounting of worlds. The registries came back, one by one, as ash. The book his name was written in had hung in another sky, inside a fixture of 7 lights, and the man standing in front of the loom had burned the book with the building. There was no true name to anchor a thread to, no native fate to splice. There was an exile, total, ledgerless, 6 days old and 12,000 years deep, standing in the middle of the master loom of everything, wearing his losses as a surface no stitch could take. The turning stuttered, a small thing, a hitch in a rhythm older than skies. It was the loudest event of the war. "You are not of this world," the first flame said. The line had been a verdict once, and then a promise, and then a silence. In the fire's even voice, it was none of those things. It was an error report. "No," Asura agreed and walked through the weave. The filaments did not cut. They were refused, sliding off him in failing handfuls of light. And the fire gave ground before the one thing in its inventory it could not right, the first backward motion of its existence, and behind it, close now, close enough at last, stood the throne. In the hall below, the king raised his head. What crossed the ruined face was recognition, and after the recognition, slowly, something that had not lived there in an age, the oldest claim a father owns, climbing up through the wreckage of him toward his mouth, assembling itself behind the burned lips. The Spartan watched the word being built. His expression did not change. The distance between them went on getting shorter. Asura saw the throne's work up close, and the chamber learned what his stillness was for. The pale metal did not bind her. Binding would have been mercy. Binding admits the bound might leave. This was plumbing. Taps of the hungry metal entered at her shoulder blades, at the small knuckles of her spine, at the thin blue branching of her wrists below the cuff scars. Set under the skin with a jeweler's neatness, seated in the bone, and through them her light left her. He could watch it leave. It rose off her in slow gold sap through the pale channels, was gathered, was braided, was fed into the blaze of the crown overhead, and the body it left behind had been burning at both ends for 6 days to keep a sky lit. Wrists his finger and thumb could have circled twice now. Gray under the closed eyes as deep as the lower rooms, the small chest rising with the careful economy of a thing that has learned exactly how much breath it is permitted. The cuffs in his fist were her size. The scars on her wrists were their shape. The wrath came up through him like a sea standing, and the chamber brightened. All of it, the channels, the weave, the turning fire, the crown, surged one shade toward white in perfect time with his fury, drinking it live, openly, the mechanism naked at last. The bellows working even here, even now, his rage arriving as revenue. The first flame did not gloat. Inventory does not require gloating. It simply burned brighter, fed. So he did the hardest thing the climb had asked of him. He banked it. At the top of everything, in front of the taps, the scars, the theft of her, with the sea inside him at full stand, he closed the furnace doors on his own wrath and let his eyes arrive first. The light around him dimmed. The crown surge faded, cheated. The great turning slowed by 1 degree, recalculating a bellows that had stopped blowing. And in the quiet his restraint had bought, the light around the throne leaned. Toward him, her gift had never been fire. Hers was the reading of what burns, the priestess sense, the soft sight that goes in through a flame to the reason underneath it. And it went into him now, through the cracked gold and the black script in 6 days of slaughter, past everything every god and ghost in 2 worlds had filed him as, down to the small lit room at the bottom of the stairwell of him, where a man had kept one face safe for 12,000 years. She read the reason. The reason had her name on it. It had never, in all that burning, had anything else on it. Her eyes opened. They found him through the body of the first flame, through the fire as if the fire were weather, and what filled them was nothing the inventory had a column for. Her hand lifted off the pale armrest. The taps pulled taut at her wrist, and she lifted it anyway. The whole small cost of the motion visible, the open hand reaching across the blaze the way it used to reach to press a thumb between his brows. And his fist, the climbing fist, closed around the next hold since before the sky had names, came open at last, and her lips moved around the first shape of a word. Far below, firelight ran the length of a rising blade and stood at the top of its arc above a kneeling king, and held. The word finished building. My son. It came out of the kneeling king like the last coin out of a torn purse, not begged, spent. Zeus said it the way he had said everything for 1,000 years, as law, a claim staked in 2 syllables on the man standing over him, on the grief in him, on the arm at the top of its arc. The oldest jurisdiction there is. Kratos looked down at the claim for a long moment. Then he put the blades away. They went home across his back, and the chains settled along his forearms, link by link, quiet as a verdict being read in a closed room. Nothing Olympus had given him would do this work. Nothing it had armed him with, nothing it could stand witness to, nothing it could later say it had a hand in. This kill did not belong to the blades. It was not the war's. It was his, and a debt a man owes by hand, he pays by hand. Zeus understood before the first blow landed. That was the unbearable part. He understood, and his ruined hands came up anyway, burned past their gold, and closed around Kratos' forearms, over the chains, not pulling, not pushing, holding. He held on the whole time and never once tried to stop them. The first blow broke the word in half. The second took the half that mattered. The king's head came back up. King's heads do. It is the last thing they unlearn. And the mouth rebuilt itself around the claim and tried again. And the third blow caught it mid-syllable and spread it across the stones in gold. By the fourth blow, the word was a vowel. The face went the way built things go. The proud line of the brow first, the lintel of him, the architecture every temple in this world had copied, driven in. Then the kingly geometry of the jaw, unhinged from everything it had ever claimed, hanging wrong, still moving. One eye went dark and stayed dark. Gold sheeted the chains, ran hot in the links, printed Kratos' knuckles and forearms, and the burned fingers that would not let go of them. The vowel lost its voice somewhere in the 6th and 7th and became a clicking, small and patient. The sound a ruined instrument makes when something inside it still remembers the song. The hands stayed. That was the whole horror of it. Burned fingers laced in the chains, holding on. And Kratos could not have said, then or ever after, whether it was the grip of a king refusing to release his last possession, or of a father who had found, at the absolute end of himself, the only embrace his son had left to accept. He hit until the clicking stopped. Then he kept hitting, because the debt was larger than the body that owed it. Past the point where it mattered, past the point where the gold still moved, down through the face and the claim and the 1,000 years underneath it, until what was under his fists had no argument left in it at all. He stopped when his arm stopped. Not mercy, expenditure. The quiet afterward had a wrongness he felt before he understood it. Above the wreck of the gates, the sky simply hung. Storms with no author, weather with no temper behind it. Somewhere out across the whole breadth of the world, every oath ever sworn on that name went unwitnessed in the same instant, mid-sentence, like candles in a hall when the doors finally closed. Kratos knelt in the gold with his vengeance complete in his hands, and it weighed nothing. He had taken the last thing he had. It lay there looking like a grave he had dug fast and could not now think what to put in. The hands on his forearms let go only when he peeled them off. Far above him, through the broken roof of the world, Something enormous shuddered and recalibrated. The flame had felt its keystone lamp go out. It did not grieve. It replanned. The great turning swung its attention down onto the red-armed thing, standing in its sanctum with a child's taps in arm's reach. And it did what it had always done with force it could not erase. It made an offer. The throne assembled itself out of the room, pale metal and borrowed light folding into a seat the size of a sky's worth of ambition. The crown's plumbing rerouting toward it, eager, obedient. The voice came from the turning itself, patient as gears. "Keep her," it said. "Keep all of it. I will make you what the dead king only pretended to be. Nothing can be stolen from the one who keeps everything." The light leaned closer, warm as a hearth, old as hunger. Forever is a fist that never opens. Asura's eyes arrived before his hands. The old Spartan's law, paid at last in full. He looked at the throne, at the taps buried in his daughter's light, at the wick and the lamp and the chandelier of harvested skies burning above the roof of everything. He looked the way he had been taught on a cold stare by a man with his own dead behind his eyes. And because he looked, he saw it. The wound this thing had built into itself across all its long turning and did not know it carried. Every voice it had ever made had answered yes. Every thread had bent. Every lamp had burned when told. Every sky had hung where hung. Down 12,000 years of perfect machinery, through every pantheon it had ever planted and pruned. It had never once been told no. Mithra moved first. Her hands, small, scorched, 6 days inside the machine, came up to the pale metal taps rooted in her own light, and she tore them out. Not his rescue, hers, the wick refusing the lamp. The plumbing shrieked and the intake gaped, suddenly starving, suddenly open, a mouth built only to take with nothing left to close it. "No," Asura said, the first one of its existence. The turning stuttered, the same hitch, the same drop beat as when the loom had tried to write him and found no purchase. A machine meeting the one word it had no gear for. Then he fed it, everything, 12,000 years of it. The wife, the daughter, the fall, the exile, the wall of 500, the sea, the stare, the tomb that lied, the lightning, the verdict, the climb, all of it gathered out of every furnace in him into one fist with the cuffs at its core. The oldest iron he owned, the shape of every promise he had ever kept. And he drove it into the open intake and let the wrath go. The flame was built to take, so it took. It took past its banks, past its margins, past the load line of forever. It could not stop taking, had never built the part that stops. And the wrath kept coming, and the intake jammed wide, and the turning ran backward against itself with a sound like every loom on earth breaking its own teeth. The first flame burst, not as fire, as the end of fire, a soundless coming apart, a chandelier let down all at once with no ceiling left to hold it. The crown of stolen divinity cracked across its whole circumference, and what it had harvested rained back out of it into the world. Far below, a dead sea shivered and moved. Weather slid off its rails and wandered, authorless, free. Eastward, beyond the wreckage, a morning began assembling itself that no one, for the first time in the history of mornings, was driving. Above the roof of the world, the chandelier of skies guttered. Some lamps went dark with dignity. Others came loose from their hooks entirely and simply left, skies going home to worlds that had forgotten the color of them. He reached her through the failing plumbing, through pale metal dying around them both, and he knelt. The third kneel, the one the other two had been practiced for. "Still breathing," he said. "Father," she said. One word, hoarse, with 6 days of machine in it. One word, the whole word. Her hand came up. Her thumb found the furrow between his brows. The trench the war had dug there. The line every god in two worlds had learned to read as a death sentence. And pressed gently, the way you smooth a crease from cloth. The war face came undone under it. It did not break. It just set down. What was left was a father's face, tired, found. He was going. He could feel the world beginning to decline him. No thread on any loom, no name in any ledger, no claim under any law. The old verdict finishing its work now as plain physics. You are not of this world. And the world, unmanaged at last, agreed. He had burned his own substance up the whole height of the climb. The fire had been hers all along. It was going home too. The masterless loom stood in arm's reach, frame still warm, craft lying open. One thread's work, one line of himself written in, and the world would have to hold him. His eyes arrived. His hands declined to follow. Her grip closed on one finger of his open hand, all of her hold fitting on one finger. And the word stay stood up in the room between them, and neither of them said it, and both of them heard it. I can't stay, he said. It was a lie, and it was the last one of the arc of his life, and she knew it the way she knew the reason inside any fire. Her one domain, the gift this world's machine had drilled into and never understood. She read what staying would cost. The loom in his hand, the wheel without a keeper, her safety rebuilt with a leash inside it, her father curing slowly into a warmer crown. She read all of it in him in one look, and she let the lie stand, the way you let a door stand, because it was holding the house up. Kratos came into the wreck light then, gold to the wrists, finished. He looked at the man dissolving at the edges, and the girl holding one finger of him, and he read the lie too. He had just walked the other road all the way to its end, and knew exactly what it bought. One father who had taken everything stood and watched one father let everything go and said nothing, because there was nothing in either of their languages for it. In his fist was a cut length of gold thread, taken from a broken loom in a burning house. Hers the crown side length, the part of her this place had owned. He folded it away into his belt like a man pocketing a receipt for something the world still owed. He nodded. Once. The nod was answered. The cuff slid out of the open palm into hers, still warm. Then the rest of him let go of the world. Upward, unraveling into the afterlight of the burst flame. The red of him going first, the gold of him going gentle, the pale ink of the pikes leaving last. The verdict outlasting the flesh it had been written on. The final solid thing of him was the hand. Open, opening. Mithra closed her own hand around the warm metal and held on. The fist inherited and repurposed forever in the inheriting. Not a weapon now. Just the way you carry something small and keep it warm. In the pooled light where he had stood, his reflection held on one breath longer than he had. Then it let go too. Morning came up over a world rebuilding without him. The sea relearned its old work, wave by unauthored wave. Weathers wandered. Somewhere the freed skies were still leaving, patient as birds. At the broken rim of the crown, a small figure stood with her fist closed against her chest, facing east, breathing, still breathing, while the first undriven dawn in the history of the world figured out, all on its own, what color it wanted to be. Below in the wreck of the gates, Kratos sat alone with what he had finished. After a long time, he put his thumb to the chain on his forearm. The old question, asked the old way. The chain had nothing to say. The gold on his hands had gone cold. The transmission holds. Your unwavering focus, your absolute gaze, serves as the singular anchor point for these colliding realities. You didn't just watch, you stabilized the breach. Portal Comic X remains tethered to this plane only because you chose to endure the friction of the void until the very end. You are the battery. You are the witness. This channel is the only lens capable of capturing the collapse, and you are its pulse. Subscribe to the frequency now and step directly into the next anomaly. The portal is wide, and it is waiting.